As you all know, we've been talking the last few days about the Protestant Reformation, and that was the leaving of the Catholic Church and the forming of the Protestant Church. Today, we're going to talk about that Reformation in England. By the end of this video, you should be able to identify Henry VIII and his role in the establishment of the Church of England, and also understand the effects of the Protestant Reformation on England. The English Reformation started in the reign of Henry VIII, but it was to have far-reaching consequences for England. Henry VIII decided to rid himself of his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, because she had failed to produce a male heir to the throne. He had already decided who his next wife would be, Anne Boleyn, and by about 1527, Catherine was considered to be too old to have any more children. However, divorce was not a simple issue. In fact, it was really complicated. Henry VIII was Roman Catholic, and the head of the church was the Pope based in Rome. The Roman Catholic faith believed in marriage for life. It did not recognize, let alone support, divorce. Those who widowed were free to remarry. That was entirely different, but husbands could not simply decide that their marriage was not working, divorce their wife, and remarry. The Roman Church simply did not allow it. This put Henry VIII in a difficult position. If he went ahead and announced that as King of England he was allowing himself a divorce, the Pope could excommunicate him. That meant that under Catholic Church law, his soul would not get into heaven. To somebody living during the time of Henry, this was a very real fear and a threat which the Church used to help keep people under its control. So Henry tried another approach. He asked the Pope for a special papal dispensation, which meant that the Pope would agree to his request for a divorce simply because he was the King of England, but it would not affect the way the Church approached other divorces. The Pope refused this, though, and Henry became quite angry. By 1533, he was so angry that he decided to order the Archbishop of Canterbury to grant him a divorce so that he could marry Anne Boleyn. The Archbishop granted his divorce against the wishes of the Pope. There really wasn't anything else that he could do if he wanted to remain on good terms with Henry. What this did is it effectively led to England breaking away from the Roman Catholic Church. Henry then placed himself as the head of the church, and in that sense, he made his divorce legal. So you might ask about what happened to the Catholics that were living in England. Well, most of the wealthy Catholics in England were the monasteries where the monks lived, and they were also the most loyal supporters of the Pope, and this made them a real threat to Henry. So Henry decided that he wanted to get rid of these monasteries, but he wanted to make the dissolution, which is what he called his attack on the monasteries, because he wasn't attacking them, he was just dissolving them, but he wanted to make it appear backed by law. So he sent around a government official to check up on what the monks were doing. It was organized by his chief minister, Thomas Cromwell. By about 1536, most of the smaller monasteries had been shut down, and the larger, more valuable ones were shut down by about 1540. Very few people in England were actually sorry to see these go, and few of the monks protested because they were given pensions or jobs in return for their monastery. Some of the monastery buildings were actually turned to ruin because the local people were allowed to take what they wanted. This meant that the bricks and etc. Could be acquired for free. That alone made the dissolution fairly popular with most of the people. However, most of the wealth from the monasteries went to Henry VIII. You might ask, how did the people of England react? Well, in fact, the vast majority of the population were pretty angry with the Roman Catholic Church already at this point. They saw the church as using them as a source of money. To get married, you had to pay. To get a child baptized, you had to pay. You had to pay the church to bury somebody. Therefore, the Catholic Church was pretty wealthy, and most of the people were pretty poor. They felt like their money was going to the church, and so there weren't really a great many protests when Henry created the Church of England, because they felt like he would probably ease up on them. The only real protest to what he was doing came in 1536 with the Pilgrimage of Grace. This was led by Robert Aske, who was a lawyer, and he wanted the monasteries left alone, and he, along with several thousand others, marched to London. Henry promised that he was going to look into their complaints, and many of the protesters went home satisfied with him, but their complaints weren't really ever looked into, and Aske himself was arrested and hung from a church tower until he, in the end, really died of starvation. So let's take a look at a side-by-side comparison of some of the changes in England during the time of Henry VIII. When Henry became king in 1509, the head of the church was the Pope in Rome. The services were all held in Latin, the prayers were all said in Latin, and the Bible was written in Latin. That meant that access for the common people was pretty limited. By the death of Henry in 1547, the head of the church was now the King of England. The services were still mostly held in Latin, and the prayers were mostly said in Latin, but the Lord's Prayer was now said in English. The Bible had been translated and printed in English for more access. So as you can see, things were starting to change in the Church of England thanks to Henry VIII. The thing for which Henry VIII is the most famous, or perhaps we should say infamous, is for having 6 wives. And I don't want to pass up an opportunity to tell you a little about them. So there were 6 women who served as queen to Henry VIII. The first was Catherine of Aragon, who we talked about, and her marriage to him was actually annulled. It wasn't considered divorce, it was considered an annulment. Anne Boleyn was his next wife, and she was executed. Jane Seymour, his 3rd wife, died after childbirth. His 4th wife, Anne of Cleves, also had her marriage annulled. Catherine Howard, like Anne Boleyn, was executed, and Catherine Parr, his 6th and final wife, was left widowed when he died. The reason for this string of wives was Henry's obsession with having a male heir. Of the 6 queens, 3 of them, Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, and Jane Seymour, each gave him 1 child who survived. 2 daughters, Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth, and a son, King Edward, who all eventually took the throne. So that's what you need to know about Henry VIII and the Church of England, the Protestant Reformation in England. Up next, be sure you're ready for a quiz on this video tomorrow. We're also going to talk a little about the Spanish Inquisition and the way it was a response to the Protestant Reformation. On Friday, remember, you have a quiz on the Renaissance and the Reformation.